And thanks very much to PHCC for having me. I'm excited to be here and really excited about this topic. And let me just briefly introduce myself, and then I'll dive into kind of what I'm planning to cover over the course of the next hour. Briefly, if we're not already connected in some fashion on LinkedIn or whatever your sort of social media platform of choice is, this is how to get a hold of me. The thing that I think probably gives me some authority to talk about this topic today is sort of the footprint of Energy Circle at this point. We currently work with about 340 what we call home performance businesses, meaning that wide variety of business models from HVAC to insulation contractors to architects and builders, essentially anybody who is going to market from the perspective of a whole house, being able to solve kind of multiple problems, we consider to be a home performance business. So we work in 49 states, in every climate zone across the country, and as a result have built up a pretty significant database of information about the industry. Millions of web visitors, thousands and thousands of leads. You'll see a little bit of information in my presentation today from our database of 64,000 actual terms that are used in search, actual search queries, people sitting down in front of Google and typing things in. We've done lots and lots of experiments, and so that's sort of informing what I'll be talking about today. At the end of the day, our sort of personal, or my personal metric and ours as a company, is the amount of fixing of buildings that is getting done by our client base, and as of the beginning of this year, we estimated that to be about $780 million. So pretty proud of that number. It's what gets us up in the morning, gets us going. So what I'm planning to cover today, first is this indoor air quality / healthy homes. I'll be talking a little bit about those two terms. But a lot of people consider this to be a kind of a newish trend. It's a kind of a new thing. It's getting a lot of attention these days. I know I'm sure many people on this call, laugh a little bit when they hear that discussion because indoor air quality, particularly around HVAC, has been around for a long time and has been the sort of the next big thing, if you will, for quite a long time. And so I want to press a little bit on that question of, is it real and is it any different from before? I want to try to provide some guidance based on some real data as to, what do we call this? What's the best thing to call this? Is it indoor air quality? Is it healthy home? What's going to drive it? And then from there, we'll kind of segue into some specific recommendations about the kinds of marketing tactics that you can use to help kind of grow this part of your business. And as I said throughout, let's chime in if you've got questions or whatever. One thing I just want to acknowledge right at the outset of this whole discussion is that the stakes are high. This is an email that came in to one of our clients last week, and a client forwarded it to me. And just to show it to me, on one hand, fantastic lead. On the other hand, wow, when you hear someone say something like, "My son was diagnosed with severe asthma and allergies to dust and pollen. I'd like to consider doing whatever I can to make the air in the house cleaner. We just spent 4 days in the ICU, so we'd like to consider all options as soon as possible." And so the key point here is that there is a lot at stake. When we're, this is not a question of someone's discomfort because of, the performance of their HVAC system. We're really dealing with sort of matters of life and death here, and I just want to acknowledge that, the stakes are high. It's exciting on one hand, but important that we get it right on the other hand. So let's go into this question of the trend and whether this is real. And what I'm gonna, there's a lot being said out there, on these days. This is, this was Salon, the overlooked problem of indoor air pollution, and you see a lot of articles similar to this. Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, wrote this tweet a little while ago, and I guess this was in May. Filtering particulates from the air makes a significant and measurable difference to health. Would like to credit Larry Page, one of the founders of Google, with turning me on to this. And so, this tweet got 5,400 likes and 1,400 retweets, and it's a big, theoretically a big deal. When Vogue magazine, of all places, writes about indoor air quality and says that, that bad indoor air may have an impact on your skin, you would think that we could kind of all high-five each other and say, wow, we've truly made the mainstream when it's in Vogue magazine and we're talking about, about skin problems as a result of indoor air quality. Having said that, and there is what I call the chasm, and the chasm that I'm talking about here is this gap between people's growing recognition about issues of indoor air quality in their homes and the environments inside their homes, and the possibility that their indoor air quality may be substantially worse than than outdoor. There is a divide between that realization and the coming to terms with the fact that maybe there is something wrong with the performance of my home, right? And so that fundamental challenge is, we meaning HVAC contractors, home performance contractors, people who are fixing homes, are not necessarily the obvious choice when someone comes to terms with the fact that, hey, my kid's got asthma. And so that frames this whole issue, I think, and it frames what I'll be talking about when I get to the section about how we want to go to market. But I think this is our fundamental challenge. I also think that the sort of coming to terms, and sort of many of you familiar with sort of the ventilation wars that have been going on around ASHRAE 62.2 and so forth. But it does seem that the world is sort of moving away from the validity of exhaust-only ventilation as kind of the only solution. This is, Dr. Joe Steverick of Building Science Corporation, one of the leading building science experts, really has been on a bit of a campaign on this, that saying pretty dramatically that exhaust-only ventilation does not work. And so with ventilation being one core component of this overall, topic we're talking about today, I think this trend towards, trend maybe perhaps away from exhaust only as a solution, I think is another relevant point to make sure that's out there on the table. All right, so what do we have for data on the question of, what do people think about this stuff? So I've showed some press about it, some mainstream media about it, but what can we turn to kind of prove the point? And what I'm going to show you next is coming from Google. When you think about people sitting down in front of a computer and starting to type in a search term like indoor air Q, it is in one sense a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week focus group on what is kind of going on in the minds of people that are sort of thinking about this. And so this data is kind of coming from that. And what I'm particularly going to show you is Google Trends. Google Trends shows you how often a particular search term is entered, or searched, relative to the total search volume across the region. So what we're looking at in the graphs that I'm about to show you is what's the trend line of the graph. Is it going up? Is it going down? What's its pattern over a long period of time? And secondly, when we compare various search terms, how do they line up against each other? Because that gives us the relative scale of one thing versus another. So just to ease into this, I just thought first I would just search a very generic term, kind of that would sort of generally reference maybe something, in a consumer mind about fixing up their home in a general sense. And so I'm using the term green building in this case. the time frame is from 2004 to present, so about 12 years of time, and the data we're looking at here is all from the United States. So it covers the entire country, and as we'll get into this, you can sort of ask yourself about some regional differences and that kind of stuff. But what this is saying with respect to the interest level of green building is that it sort of peaked in, at the end of 2007, and sort of interesting to see that it's been on a pretty downward slope, since then, if not completely flat, flat or a little bit down over the course of the last few years. So in some ways, kind of surprising, right? That green building, which some would say has kind of been on the rise, by this data, looks like it's declining. All of this is subject to however we may choose to interpret it. One way that I sort of would like to think about this is that maybe the world is coming to terms with green building as too generic a term. It doesn't, what does it really mean, and so forth. The next term I thought I'd throw in again, just trying to warm us all up with some discussion about kind of major large terms, is energy efficiency. And you kind of notice that compared to the previous graph, the shape is not all that much different. There was sort of this peak. In this case, the peak was a little bit farther down the road. In this case, maybe 2009 was kind of that peak of energy efficiency. This makes a certain amount of sense for two reasons, I think. One is that during the funny money days of the ARA days of kind of lots of federal government money being spent on training energy auditors and so forth, this was a big deal. And the other thing, of course, that is clearly, in my mind, affecting this is energy prices. These were, 2009 was when they were sort of high, and they've been in decline in ways that none of us probably could have, possibly imagined over time, and consequently, efficiency, isn't quite, such a popular term. But, it is fairly flat, in recent times. I use the term home performance here because we don't have a lot of things to, a lot of terminology to reflect how people might be thinking about this sort of concept of the house as a system and how a house, performs across, multiple systems, from mechanicals to building envelope to, to air quality, et cetera. Home performance is not a particularly well understood term, but it's interesting to note that it has been almost entirely steadily down since 2004. So I'm not against this term, and I don't want you to take away that this is don't ever talk about home performance before, but this does give you a sense of kind of a lack of the lack of understanding of what this term means. It's worth throwing in just because, a lot of us, so I look for, in this case, a proxy for, high performance building, right? And Passive House is, has gotten a lot of traction recently in terms of the number of, projects that are being certified, a very, very stringent standard, as we all kind of know. But interesting to see here that, sometime in sort of early 2008, there's this big spike that sort of, and then, a kind of somewhat up, but frankly, I would have anticipated this to be even more, trending even more, even more. So again, looking here for, any data that we can find that represents what the world might be thinking about this sort of new era of higher performing buildings. Now, this is indoor air quality. So how does this jive with everything I just said about, this kind of coming to terms? You see here that, very similar to the shape of that home performance thing, peaks of search in 2005 and a fairly kind of steady, steady downward peaks. One of the things that I think may be happening on this particular term is that it's more of a professional term, and I'll get into that a bit more in terms of what we call this. But as consumer awareness of indoor air quality may be on the rise, or let's call it healthy home potentially, maybe this term, which is more professional in its usage, in this case happens to be headed down. Meanwhile, indoor air testing, funny, you can never quite understand why, Google recorded no search for something like that from 2005 to 2007 and then spiky results. But, since some data started showing up in 2010, a little bit of a flat, but you definitely see, and most immediately, some pretty big jumps in that data, in kind of the recent, in recent years. This is the search term, what causes asthma? And, in this case, what you tend to see here, a little bit of a shrunk time frame in this particular case, but what you see is the seasonality of these search terms. So spiking throughout the course of a year. But generally speaking, this is an upward trending graph, and I think that is absolutely consistent with all the data that shows, that the instances of asthma are on the rise and so forth. This is mold removal. Again, so you got to remember that you put yourself in the in the sort of wear the hat of the typical homeowner who just sort of says, "Wow, I've found some mold. I want it removed." Right? They don't necessarily think about the source of that mold and where the moisture is coming from and so forth. And so this is that term, mold removal. Again, showing seasonality year to year. But generally speaking, on a fairly upward, upward trend. I haven't really been talking about the lower half of these graphs, but one of the things that's I think fairly interesting about, about the geographic stuff that you see is that mold is not quite as, mold removal as a search term is not quite as climate zone specific as you might think it would be, right? There seems to be as much sort of interest in this term in some kind of western dry climate states as there is in kind of the moist mid-Atlantic, for example. So that's just sort of interesting. This is off-gassing. So obviously one of the key questions in the overall indoor air quality thing is the off-gassing of of furniture and carpets and so forth. Generally kind of an upward trend. And then this is formaldehyde, and this one is interesting because you see it sort of chugging along over the years, being kind of fairly flat, and then all of a sudden there's this great spike. Guess what that is? Well, 60 Minutes does a story about lumber liquidators and their formaldehyde-laden flooring, and that sort of spikes it. So clearly there's kind of those kinds of things. Now this is healthy home, and I sort of saved this one for kind of towards the end. This is a clearly upward trending graph, the most upward trending of anything that we've looked at so far. I love the Wayne Gretzky analogy of his brilliance as a hockey player was knowing where the puck was going to be, and so this is this one I think is is kind of interesting on that point. Now, a few just comparisons now. So what I'm now doing is kind of showing, because remember these are all just sort of everything we've looked at so far just shows you kind of trend lines up or down. Now we're starting to show relativity between terms in terms of volume. Okay, the vertical axis in this case is just an index from 100 to to 0. So what this is showing is that healthy home has a substantially higher volume over indoor air quality. You see that downward and then upward thing. So this is kind of, I'm leading the horse to water a little bit here, but this is sort of part of my belief that healthy home is sort of the term we ought to be glomming onto. It's worth comparing healthy home to home performance, and again you see just this fairly dramatic difference in volume, not surprising, as well as a big difference in the trend line, and then comparing healthy home to some of the high performance brands out there, certifications like Passive House or like Energy Star Homes. Many of us think of Energy Star as the leading brand in the kind of energy efficiency industry, but Energy Star Homes. And you see in this case that Healthy Home really crushes even Passive House, which many of us think is sort of popular these days, and even Energy Star. So it does seem to be kind of the the term. this is the one sort of, I'm going to show you just two studies now, just a couple of select things that have been done that I think are statistically valid surveys, asking people about healthy homes. This one in particular is the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies Healthy Home Survey. So this was a statistically valid survey of over 2,000 homeowners across the country in 2014, so it's fairly recent. And what this said is that 24%, basically, the total of people who expressed either specific or suspected concerns about healthy home was about 24%. And this is, so one hand you could say that seems a little bit on the small side. On the other hand, you say if 24% of homeowners across the country, you choose your number, 124 million homes or so, that is a giant number in terms of people who have this concern, and this was in 2014. When you ask them to cite a specific issue that they relate to, indoor air quality is number one. 70% of those people say indoor air quality, with to a lesser sort of extent water quality, a lesser extent harmful materials and chemicals. So maybe a little bit counter to what I had said earlier about that indoor air quality is not a good term. It's not a bad term. I'm just making the case here that I think healthy home is a little bit better. In terms of the specific, what they were asked in this question is, what are the top three concerns about indoor air and environmental quality issues? And it's sort of interesting just to see what's at the top of the list and kind of what's at the bottom of the list. And it's pretty interesting that household dust and pet dander, dampness. It's always interesting to me that water quality comes into this. Outdoor pollution surrounding the home, pretty interesting. But then you start to fall off, and when you talk about air pollution from indoor cooking and heating at 18%, which I think many people, professionals, know that the indoor, the kitchen is a much greater source of that. Lack of sufficient ventilation, pretty interesting, and you kind of see on down the list. So it's just interesting, I think, to see that things like lead paint and asbestos rank fairly low, and dust and dampness and outdoor pollution tend to be kind of up near the top. This was saying, okay, expressing intention to act on specific projects, and the black is I've already done this, and the red is I may undertake this at some point in the future. And it's pretty interesting to see how many people have claim that they have already done something: installed a water filtration system, used low VOC paints, removed mold, installed a ventilation system, which more than 30% in this case said they've already installed a ventilation system. And I think that probably speaks, I doubt that's a real valid number, and that probably speaks to to sort of people's misunderstanding. But then you look at kind of the red lines, which is what they plan to do in the future, and you see sort of removing mold ranking pretty high, low VOCs ranking pretty high, removal of interior furnishings and carpets and so forth ranking fairly high. We clearly, I think, have some work to do here on on what ventilation is and how it works and so forth. And then this question, last one from this study, is how did you come to understand these issues? What was the trigger basically that did it? And what's interesting, I think, here is that the household member developed symptoms was the major thing, and what is most interesting to me is the next bar over, medical professionals' advice at 34%. Almost, not quite, but almost half of that. And so that to me speaks to one of the challenges we face, which I will talk about in a couple minutes, that the medical profession is not very tuned in to asking the question of what's going on in your home. So that's interesting. One more study And this is done by McGraw-Hill, and there's a whole lot in this one, and I cherry-picked a few specific graphs that are good. But this is a pretty good one, and obviously this will be in the slides that you get, so you can go look this up if you choose to. But the question here was, what are the most effective terms for conveying the impact of decisions on building occupant health? And the blue or darker of the lines is what the professionals think, the project team. And then the sort of grayish line is most effective from the general public. So this is a study of, it's combining a bunch of both professional research as well as homeowner research. Very interesting to see this flip-flop that improved indoor air quality is very much a, more of a project team professional thing versus healthy building is very much of a general public thing. So again, supporting my sort of, my contention that I think healthy homes, healthy buildings is our term. This is asking the amount that a homeowner would be willing to pay for a healthy home, and I think a lot of this is in the new home construction realm. So do that. The key point, we don't have to sort of dissect this. The larger the circle, the more potent that component. The group that is willing to spend the most for a healthy home are people who are 60 to 69 and 70 plus. And it's not surprising, they are the people who are the most vulnerable population. They also happen to be the ones with the money. So that's pretty interesting and kind of surprising in some ways, although you see that 8% in the 20 to 39, the so-called, and that's more the millennial generation. But sort of interesting that those middle ages, 40 to 59, not so much in terms of they're willing to spend more. This is then the criteria for what is most influential to each group, and it's it's interesting. This was done in 2015, so you gotta sort of take it with a certain grain of salt around that's probably after energy prices had fallen, but still, energy efficiency was sort of the highest ranking thing across all three of these major age groups. But I point out the middle one here, healthier indoor living environment, where there's a pretty significant skew in this case towards the folks 55 and older being those factors being more influential. So that's a little bit about sort of some of the data that exists. There's a lot out there, and I had to sort of be pretty selective to kind of choose what to talk about. But hopefully that was interesting and kind of useful. I do want to just say very, very briefly that there's another phenomenon going on, which is that these sensors, the Internet of Things, are growing like crazy, and these are going to be everywhere. And so we have now, and we will continue to have a lot more data about what's going on inside of people's houses. This is a scale. It's an internet scale. My wife got this for me. Let the record show I didn't get it for her. But it's it keeps track of how much I weigh and reports it in a nice little app. But this scale happens to have a CO2 sensor in it, and so that CO2 sensor was apparently so inexpensive that this sort of company could just stick that in there as as a sort of an added benefit or a differentiator for it. This is a product that once when it was first brought to market was a weather station for outdoor activity, what's going on outside. But now they've added indoor sensors with temperature, humidity, some measure of indoor air quality and CO2 and sound, and that's a weather station. Some of you may have heard of this product, Fubot. Fubot is a dedicated indoor air quality device. It costs $199 at retail. It's $149 for a contractor purchase. It's got VOCs, PM 2.5, temperature, humidity, and CO2. And it's got a nice little app, and it's sits in your house and kind of reports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on what's going on. So I'm not calling any of these out because I have any preference for them. I'm just saying that There is a lot going on in this sensor world. Some people say that sensors are the new kind of the new product subject to Moore's law, the sort of exponentially declining price for the power. And so this is just sort of some of the change that happened over the course of 7 years to 2014. You know, the number of sensors, the cost is down 1,000 times, the power consumption is down 1,000 times, the number of transistors is up 1,000 times. There is exponential growth, meaning that the price of these things is going to be smaller and smaller. And so how this all plays out, I don't think any of us really know, other than the fact that I think it's fair to say that that people will have more of these sensors in their homes, and that will be more of a business driver for us. In other words, people will identify their problems by, devices taking their measure, and/or, we may see the opportunity as an industry to deploy more of these sensors as ways to kind of build relationships with our client base and to identify, potential opportunities. Okay, so let's go now to the sort of the naming question, if you will, like, what do we call this? And, and I'm not kind of, this isn't like a Peter saying adamantly you should call it, or you shouldn't call it indoor air quality, but I just wanted to sort of frame this a little bit in the question of, where does it fit in the context of the kind of what might be considered as sort of a significant driver of, I want a better home, a greener home, or whatever it is. And so, if you look back on kind of the 5 guiding sort of principles of green building, that was energy efficiency, resource efficiency, water conservation, indoor environmental quality, and then site and community impact. And that was sort of a general consensus. This might be a little LEED oriented. I'm not a big fan of LEED, but that's it. Interesting though that it's indoor environmental quality, not indoor air quality. So environmental being a kind of a larger term. This I thought was just excellent. This is kind of from this Professor William Nazaroff. He's an engineering professor at UC Berkeley, and he's the editor of Indoor Air. And he just said it so simply: 4 ideas in 12 words: minimize indoor emissions, keep it dry, ventilate well, and protect against outdoor pollution. And and that's as we're sort of going down the road here to how do you start to communicate about this, having a few principles like that you can stand for, I think can be very helpful. This is a company in California which has really kind of made an aggressive move on this, Hayward Healthy Homes. He's got a similarly kind of condensed and short version: continuous fresh air, properly seal and insulate, minimize toxic materials, and then cleanable surfaces. And so either, if you look at either of those, one of the questions I think on the table here as we talk about this subject is there a business model? Some of you may have seen the blog post that I wrote, questioning whether we have that. But when you start standing for these particular kinds of things, minimizing indoor emissions, ventilating well, keeping it dry, protecting against outdoor pollution, there is significant business behind any one of these kinds of principles. So I guess I am coming around to the conclusion that I really like Healthy Home. I'm not saying that you abandon talking about indoor air quality, but I think this data that I showed and kind of where the world is going, the relationship of the concept of healthy home to the wellness movement, which is obviously exploding. I really like Healthy Home as a way to encompass a lot more than just indoor air quality. I don't think, much as we as professionals might think of indoor air quality as, as comfort related and temperature related and so forth, I think the concept of Healthy Home encompasses more than that. It encompasses air quality, it encompasses comfort, etc. So that's a little bit of opinion of Peter. All right. So let's now go to sort of what what I would consider kind of the foundations of we're starting down the path now of, all right, how do we start to market this and tell the world that we have this particular offering. And the first question that I always want to ask when we start talking about marketing is who who are we selling to? And the question here is, who's buying, healthy home services, who's buying high performance? In generally speaking, both of these are relatively small categories in the world currently. We're confident that they're all growing and so forth. The reality is there just is not very much data. There's not much in terms of, I showed you that Harvard study and the McGraw-Hill study. That's probably the best stuff that's out there in terms of the motivations for buying healthy. But the question I'm asking here is demographically, or geographically, who's buying? Is it young people? Is it old people? Is it wealthy people? Is it greenies? Who's buying? I have super condensed, because I do a whole presentation and have been talking about this across the country on this particular question. But the reality is there's just not very much real data. And so what I've been doing is asking rooms full of contractors and various folks, what do they think? And, and our clients as well. And there is what I hear is that the dominant demographic is the baby boomers, the people, the older folks, that what we call the last home phenomenon. To second, sort of in second place, but a fairly distant second, are the Gen X, the couples that are maybe moving out of the city to a nicer suburb to put their young kids in good schools. And then, of course, we're all sort of waiting for what's going to happen with this crazy millennial generation that's currently steeped in college debt and not buying houses particularly, and sort of but poised from a size standpoint to come forward. The other categories that I think most folks tend to do is fairly generally well educated academics, people in technology, and professions that are more technologically oriented. Obviously, people who are more upscale or wealthy. To a certain extent, the green or kind of left-leaning crowd, people who are health-focused, and to a certain extent, the first home. So I'm, again, super condensing a lot of information here, but here's the point I want to make, is that it's my sort of belief, and I've said this and given this presentation to probably more than 1,000 people in our industry, that the skew towards the baby boomers, towards that older crowd, is very, very pronounced. Now that I made up this graph, so slap me for sort of faking some data here. It's a 100% guesstimate, but even if I'm saying that I think the people buying these high performance and healthy home services are about 85% older folks. In that kind of time of life of last house, even if, give me plus or minus whatever, 25%, or something like that, it's still a very, very significant skew, and one that I think needs to affect how we go to market. So happy to, during the discussion or comments, if anybody wants to push back on this, I'd love the discussion. But that's sort of the conclusion that I've come to, is that it's much more skewed towards this guy, right? I call him Last Home William, the guy who, you don't have to read this, but we've kind of painted the picture of Last Home William. He's a retired doctor, and he wants to live out his days in a comfortable, high performance house. He wants to absolutely assure that it's healthy, and this is the center line of our very best customer, because they're motivated, and they're the ones that have the resources to be able to make those decisions. And hopefully a lot of what I presented today. So I did want to jam that in a little bit as we start to now talk about how do you go to market, because when you do that, it affects everything that you may do. So to sort of so what here are the sort of 6 things that I want to talk about as kind of key marketing strategies. First and foremost is your brand and or positioning. How much does your company stand for this concept of healthy home? Do you put forward on your website and various other places relevant content and messaging about it? Do you have case studies to sort of tell the stories? I then want to talk about two specific kind of tactics, Facebook, and specifically paid Facebook advertising, as well as paid Google AdWords advertising, paid search. And then I'll finish by talking about outreach to the medical community, which we're getting started on, and it has some promise, but is something we all have to work on. So again, as I start to go down this road, I want to just remember back to this key point, which is that the goal of our marketing effort has to be to get across this major gap, right? This gap from, you know, people waking up about issues in their house and their children being sick and sort of somehow coming to that realization, like, wait a second, you know, we all spend most of our time in this house. Is there something wrong here? But to coming to that realization about, is there something, you know, to do with the performance of the building that can be fixed to address it. And so we have work to do, and so stage one of any kind of marketing effort has got to be helping to educate people across that chasm. So first, you know, ask yourself, how much does your company stand for, you know, healthier homes, or you know, or making the home, you know, making a home more healthy? Or alternatively, a way to ask that is, you know, where in the brand hierarchy is the Healthy Homes message? This is that company I referred to, Hayward Healthy Home. They've obviously, you know, they've kind of put the whole, you know, bet the farm on this thing. They've wrapped the whole company, you know, around Healthy Home. And there are some, you know, many examples, I think, out there in the world. I wouldn't say many, but there are enough examples out there in the world of companies that have done this, you know, traditional air conditioning, heating and air companies that have chosen the name kind of Healthy Home as a way to, you know, kind of differentiate themselves. This is one that I thought was, you know, pretty interesting, called Breathe Easy Home. And, you know, essentially this is an offshoot of a more traditional whole house, both, you know, home performance contractor doing both mechanical as well as building envelope work. And it's just interesting that they called it the ultimate indoor air quality system. And they gave it a name and called it a system, but essentially it is everything that you might do typically, you know, in, you know, a house to, you know, to control, you know, to have, you know, efficient and high quality, you know, furnace and air conditioning, to have good filtration, to, you know, to have ventilation, but to control humidity, control air leakage from the outside, you know, measure dust and dander, et cetera. It's everything that, you know, any company doing kind of a whole house approach would offer, and yet they've packaged it together as, you know, the ultimate indoor air quality system. Kind of pretty interesting. You know, the reality is for most folks, you know, and I'm not suggesting by any of this that you know, rename your company, but I'm just trying to frame up the question of, you know, how far into this do you go, right? You know, this is a company that has done a really nice job with, you know, with content, you know, not just words on a page, but really good sort of visual content to kind of help define known threats to indoor air quality, as well as steps to improve. But, you know, more realistically, I think, you know, the question is, do you, you know, in your services, you know, are you listing Healthy Homes or indoor air quality or whatever you choose to do as, you know, one of your kind of core services? You know, more often than not, the typical HVAC site, you know, we do heating, we do cooling, you know, what we do repair and replacement, you know, you tend not to see it. So again, I'm not saying that there is a right answer or a wrong answer here, but just ask yourself, if you want to take advantage of this Healthy Homes concept, does it exist in your brand messaging? You know, might it be maybe a tagline? If you're XYZ Heating and Cooling, might you, you know, might you say, you know, towards healthier homes, or some kind of a tagline concept like that to try to take advantage of that and stand for it, or at least get your the service of doing something about indoor air quality higher up on your website in terms of the architecture. So that's sort of high-level content. Now I'm sort of drilling down a little bit. Is do you have relevant content about the topics in sort of buried in your website? And this is an example of a actually in this case a kind of a remodeling contractor who's very good at sort of blogging and talking about, in this case, a homeowner's guide to ventilation. Don't leave fresh air to chance, and talking about the value of whole house ventilation. So there's lots of topics here, the indoor environment and healthy home and IAQ and the relationship of energy costs and clean air and comfort and all of these sort of topics. So ask yourself, there's lots to write about. I'll talk more in a second about that. But do you have a good amount of this sort of healthy home stuff on your site? Secondly, are the services of Healthy Home, however you choose to go to market, whether it's selling filtration devices, selling ventilation, retrofit systems, selling a testing service, do you have content for those specific services? Are you regularly communicating your expertise in this particular area? And then lastly, how fresh is your content? This is everyone's big challenge, everyone's Achilles heel on the web is not letting our websites go stale and static. Freshness becomes really important. So having stuff to talk about, is pretty good. The good news, however, is that there's lots to say about indoor air quality. I mean, it's an interesting topic. It's jarring to people. Your house, your kids, and asthma. Low levels of CO. The air in your house, where does it come from? Is your house making you sick? There's just lots of things here that can be talked about and can form the sort of a consistent stream of content in your site. Remember, content is not always words. It's not always graphics. This is a healthy air survey that many companies have deployed. I think can be very, very effective. We get good response rates on people kind of filling this out. Third, I would say, would be case studies. And again, this is one of the challenges of this is not overstating what we can do and not putting ourselves at risk of any kind of liability for overpromising a fix. And yet, when you do a job and the end result of that job is an improvement in indoor air quality as stated by that customer, like that third-party endorsement, that is incredibly powerful. And I think more and more we've got to sort of be telling the stories of, this is the before, this is the after, and we did this and this, and the end result is, dramatic improvement as stated by that customer. Facebook. So I want to go a little deeper on this because I think this is a pretty exciting opportunity. The thing that's sort of so exciting about Facebook right now is how incredibly targeted you can get in terms of really dialing into very specific interests. And so the example I'm showing here is the state of Oregon. So I was out there speaking recently. I went into the state of Oregon and chose homeowners in the state of Oregon that are interested in severe asthma, asthma and allergy friendly, awareness, ducts, indoor air quality, mold growth, sick building syndrome, etc. And that narrowed the audience down of homeowners in one state to 4,700 people. When you get that narrowly targeted and focused, the cost of marketing to that audience becomes negligible. I mean, very, very inexpensive. So the targeting is really exciting. It just sort of, you can just look at some of these things. You can target by interests, you can target by behaviors, and you can target by demographics. And you just look at some of this stuff, and it just makes you kind of crazy. I mean, it's sort of, people are interested in ventilation, and people interested in the ASHRAE handbook. But how long they've been in their residence, recent home buyers, people who pay primarily with cash. One of our clients recently challenged me to go find him pregnant women, and I thought that was kind of as a target audience for his services, and I thought that was kind of a creepy request. Sure enough, in Facebook you can target expectant parents. the year the home was built, the square footage of the home value, so the liquid assets and net worth of the people. So it's mind-blowing to the point of being, I know, a little bit creepy, but pretty exciting from a marketing standpoint. Creative is the whole game. You know, targeting is half the game, and then the other half of the game is creative in Facebook. And you've got to recognize that it's not a very promotionally driven medium, right? If you go in there and sort of do a hard sell advertisement, that is not going to fly. Versus something like this, 3 simple steps towards better air quality. Take a deep breath. It's a very Facebooky kind of photo. It's sort of soft, and you can see in this particular case, 5,000 people were reached by a modest spend of this. I think this might have, this was 5,000 people over the course of a couple weeks, spending no more than maybe $100 total to get that done. So pretty amazing. It's important to put Facebook in context. Relative to other means of marketing, and we're looking here at conversion rates, meaning of the traffic that you got to a website, what percentage of that traffic converted to a lead. And so, and this is about 35 or 32 Energy Circle clients over last year. Paid search was sort of the highest performing, and if you look at Facebook relative to the other types of traffic here, it looks bad at 2.61%, but it's important to put it in context in that Facebook is not to be measured just on the basis of conversion only. I mean, 2.61% is not terrible conversion. It's nowhere near as good as some of these others. It's not terrible. But what you can get if you go to the right side of this chart is, at 151,000 impressions, reach of almost 24,000 people, and in this case, 2,000 clicks to a website. So at a pretty low price, this is over kind of a period of time, but 50 cents a click. So the key point here is that Facebook has a lot of, think of it almost as the new billboard, right? That is a lot more flexible to put up and down. It's a lot cheaper. You can test it, for a week or two, and you get a lot of impressions of your company. And if one of the things you were trying to accomplish was the messaging that your company is serving this healthy home need, this would be a terrific way kind of to do that. All right, I want to 5-6 minutes left, so I think I can kind of make it here. I'll go a little quickly through this, but it is increasingly important, I think, in my opinion, to be participating in paid search. This is Google AdWords and/or Bing and the Microsoft network. There are many reasons to do so. One of them, however, is that the amount of real estate left in Google search that is not paid is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. This is sort of, indoor air quality services, New Jersey search that I did earlier today, and the first 2 things that come up, and it are 2 ads, right, that are being paid for by these 2 particular advertisers. The experience, we're sort of doing a lot of testing with this, and the experience here is that the volumes tend to be low, but the number of search terms, it tends to be kind of many. And so there's lots, it's everything from, testing to, actually we have very good conversion rate on asbestos, right? And the people that we're doing this advertising for don't deal with asbestos problems. If there really was asbestos, it's just people who think they have that, and that's how they enter in. This is the sort of top 25 search terms, and we won't be able to have time to go into these in detail, but if I sort of highlight a few things, fair number of them are about mold. The majority of them are what I would describe as about air quality kind of questions. What is the best humidity level for the home? What are normal humidity levels in a home? You see how that question is repeated multiple times. What's the optimum humidity level? it's very interesting. And then the sort of third major sort of bucket is sort of air quality standards and/or air quality testing. As you look at these, what's fascinating is how long these search terms are. What is the optimum humidity level for a home? Part of that is the phenomenon of people talking to their phones. So this is, these search terms are getting longer and longer and longer. It's not, just IAQ anymore, or healthy home as a two-word, search term. It's pretty fascinating. When we look at the performance of search, there's a number of different factors that go into that, but conversion rate is among the most important. I got 100 people, I drove 100 people to the site. How many of them converted to a lead? And across a variety of different buckets here, you see that, with the one exception of air quality, the performance on a conversion basis is relatively poor, right? And I think this reflects that chasm, if you will, the gap between us as sort of, the right solution for someone who has a mold problem, whereas kind of air quality is not too bad. And generally, just to put that in context, right, of like, those, so 6.8 versus less than 1% conversion rates, this is sort of across the 64,000 search terms I mentioned earlier. These are the kinds of, conversion rates that we tend to see across multiple things. So, HVAC and mechanical tends to be a very competitive space and is harder and harder to get that kind of, get conversion. Let me finish and wrap up here, leave some time, is, getting out to the medical community, because what we're finding is that this is not an easy, it's not easy to break through. This is a hard audience to reach and to engage, but when you do, when you have success and a single, breaking into a single medical practice can have dramatic impact, it is worth every second of it. And so what we're recommending and what we are testing with a number of folks that we work with are, first and foremost, build a target list of asthma and allergy and ear, nose, and throat doctors. Just have that, as you're kind of out in the field. It's okay to do drive-bys. It's okay to leave literature. We have had, modest success with mailings, but it's low cost because they're so easily targeted. We've done a couple of situations in which we've offered a free test for the office staff. In other words, let anyone in the office can do that. And that's sort of the way to kind of break through. In the places where we have broken through, what we're starting to test now is having a kind of customized newsletter about healthy home in waiting rooms, to have a very clear brochure that can be handed out by the doctors and the nurses and the physician's assistants to the patients, that sort of say, here's a company that could help you, assess whether there's something wrong in your home. And then the other thing is a kind of a healthy home survey, a very, taking that simple concept of, do you experience, any of the following things in your home, and if you've answered yes to X number of them, you may want to consider, checking this out. So that's the summary. Get content on your site and address the brand question. Tell the stories and case studies. Try out some of the social media and consider paid marketing, and then start to test these medical relationships.